Abuse is like a wildfire. Years later, the evidence remains, even though the landscape has begun healing. This is the Malala River, which burned in September 2020. This is what 6 years of growth looked like after the fire. My son endured almost a decade of emotional abuse, all now called coercive control, until he was allowed by our court-ordered parenting coordinator to stop visiting his father. This is his story.
We are in an area above the Malala River Canyon, near an area that burned in the 2020 wildfires. We are also near a ridgeline where you can see a wildfire that is currently burning. Wildfires are a form of trauma to the landscape that can leave scars that last long after the fires have gone out. In my childhood, I went through a metaphorical wildfire in my family and at school, a fire that burned for several years and that has left me with my own scars. These scars, unfortunately, are very painful for me, and so because I don't really talk about this to many people, I won't be showing my face in this video, but I will be telling my story. The scars that I face include Irritable Bowel Syndrome, which is a stress-related illness, as well as struggles with depression and other issues that I will discuss in future videos. My parents divorced when I was 8 years old. At first, things were okay, and I liked going over to my father's house just as much as I liked being at my mother's house. However, within several months of the divorce, my father started dating my stepmother, and she started imposing strict rules. These rules included requiring me and my sister to brush teeth in the bathroom, required me, my sister, and my stepsister to stay at the front door of any house that we were viewing an open house of when we went to go view open houses. Things were still horrible, but as she got more and more control over my father, the situation at my father's deteriorated. Within a couple years, things exploded. There are many incidents that occurred as my childhood fire raged. I will only go over the worst of these incidents, but these were some especially traumatic incidents in my childhood. The first incident I will go of occurred when I was in 4th grade. It was February of my 4th grade year, just a couple years or so after my stepmother started dating my father. I was tired and not feeling well, and I wanted to talk to my mom. Normally, I was allowed to call my mother when I asked, but my stepmother told me no. I asked again, and she forced me to sit on the bed with her. She forced me to look her in the eyes and repeat criticisms of my mom back to me for over half an hour. My stepmother called my mom a leech and said that she has no friends at church because she doesn't have a job. My mom didn't have a job because she was giving me extra help at home since I had Asperger's syndrome and I was struggling to adjust to school, and I was slow to learn certain subjects such as math and English. In addition, my stepmother was also interrogating me about my mom, and she would write down any answer that I gave in a notebook. I told my stepmother to stop multiple times, and she persisted. In addition to this incident, my stepmother gave my sister and I multiple stern lectures for minor misbehavior during the weekend and during a couple of preceding weekends. I soon refused to go to my father's and stopped going for a few weeks. My mother ensured that I talked to my father every single night, though, even though I didn't want to talk to him. Unfortunately, because emotional abuse was fully legal at the time and because I was only 11 years old, the law required that I resume visitation. At the same time that visitation resumed, the school council recommended that we get a family therapist. My mother immediately started taking us to therapy. For several months, my father took us to hotels during the weekends, and I vastly preferred it to being with my stepmother. However, he was on the phone with my stepmother often and would often speak to her late into the night and frequently was not paying attention to us. My father did not attend therapy with me until several months after I resumed visitation, and he would only go to therapy twice a year. In contrast, my mother would take us to therapy almost every other week and always followed the therapist's recommendations and advice. The second incident that occurred during my visitation, after several months of going to hotels with my father, we resumed visitation with my stepmother. The situation was on and off, and there were some incidents that I will discuss in later videos. However, the situation exploded again about a year and a half after resuming visitation with my stepmother. By this point, I was 13 years old and in 7th grade. We were visiting for Thanksgiving. My stepsister and sister had a fight, and my stepmother gave them a stern lecture. My stepmother called my sister a brat and said that if my sister told the family therapist about the incident, that she would get my father and stepmother into trouble. My sister left, and my father came in and comforted my sister. My stepmother entered the room where they were and resumed the lecture. My father looked uncomfortable as she did, as my stepmother was lecturing my sister. For the remainder of the visit, my stepmother frequently called us in to lecture us sternly over minor incidents. My sister was so unhappy that she emailed my mom on the computer that we shared. She asked my mom to come pick us up. However, my mom was not able to take us away from our father's house. After my sister emailed our mother, my sister, stepsister, and I plotted to run away since we were all unhappy. My dad and stepmother removed the computer the next weekend, and I was without a working computer for which I could do my homework on for the remainder of my time visiting my father's house. Things calmed down for a few weeks after this incident until we had an Easter visitation. At the beginning of this Easter visitation, my dad took my sister and me to the grocery store to get some things for the weekend, and I got some Jelly Bellies like I always do. However, my father got angry with me and made us leave the store. My sister and I were upset since we normally got Jelly Bellies and it wasn't an issue. When we returned to the car, my father shouted at me and threatened to ground me. The next day was far worse. My sister and I were preparing to work on schoolwork when my stepmother asked me to come downstairs. I said I wanted to stay upstairs and work on schoolwork with my sister, but my stepmother kept insisting that I come downstairs with them. When we got to the living room, my stepmother asked in a sarcastic tone, "Are you mad?" I said stop it and tried to ignore her. Then she said that nobody else in the family behaves like this, and she and my father yelled at me for 10 minutes. I finally walked away, as I was close to tears at this point, but they followed me. I locked myself in the bathroom, and my father started pounding on the door, demanding that I come out. When I then went to the bedroom, or my sister's bedroom, and stood against the door. My dad pounded on the door several more times before threatening to break down the door. I finally let him in, and he shouted at me at the top of his lungs for a couple of minutes until my stepmother took us downstairs. The lecture concluded shortly thereafter. During the last couple years of visitation, the mistreatment of me became more systematic. In the middle of my 7th grade year, right before this Easter visitation that I talked about, my father and stepmother had moved my sister and I into separate rooms. About a year after losing the computer in my room, they moved the phone from my room to the living room downstairs. The phone downstairs was attached to a cord and it could not be taken anywhere, and was also in an uncomfortable corner near the kitchen. My sister and stepsister could get away with almost any type of behavior, while my behavior was frequently nitpicked by my father and stepmother. They frequently criticized my posture, they made me put my hands in my pockets, and they would take my sister and stepsister's side when there was any conflict between us. There were also disparities in how they handled celebrations and special events, such as birthdays. For example, I was asked to clean the house on my birthday while my sister and stepsister were not asked to do any chores on any of their birthdays. My sister and stepsister were allowed to exclude me from parts of the house despite my father and stepmother insisting that I interact with the family. My sister and stepsister would gang up on me and attack me anytime I watched TV when they were around. I was effectively forced to go to my room since there was no other space that I could hang out in. My father and stepmother's house was small and very skinny, with only a small living room and a small dining room that I was not allowed to hang out in. However, at the same time, when I would hang out in my room, my father and stepmother would lecture me and say that I needed to interact with the family more. A little over a year before visitation with my father finally ended, I was banned from using the main bathroom upstairs. I was only allowed to use the half bath downstairs to do regular restroom business, and the master bathroom in my father's and stepmother's room to take a bath. My father and stepmother slept in until late, and they frequently locked the door whenever they were hanging out in there. And so there were significant times of the day where the bathroom were unavailable if I wanted to take a bath. During the last couple of years that I was visiting my father's, family dinners would happen generally after 10 p.m., and if I participated, I would be tired in school after the visit and have trouble concentrating in class, so I frequently skipped family dinners and went hungry. In addition, I was not allowed to eat my sister or stepsister's stores of junk food, which meant that I frequently went hungry at my father's house. During the last couple therapy visits before visitation with my father finally ended, my father would laugh at me, shout at me, put me down, and accuse me of lying and or being a chronically misbehaving teenager every time I brought up concerns. My father would also set up situations right before visitations ended, right before pickup and drop-off, that resulted in conflict between my sister and I. For example, there was a time when my sister was playing Sims, which is a computer game, right before pickup and drop-off, and my father talked about how great it was that she was playing computer games and that she should take it to mom's with her. My sister said that my mom didn't want her playing such games for an extended period of time, and my father criticized my mom for that. My sister got into an argument with my mom and I after pickup and drop off. Whenever I argued with my sister, my sister would tell her friends and other classmates at school compromising secrets about me, which caused me to have problems with bullying at school. In addition, my sister and stepsister had already attempted to recruit people to come over and gang up on me at my father's house a couple different times back when I was in 6th grade. The first time that my stepsister attempted to recruit someone to gang up on me was when she called over her friend who was a goth, who lived a couple blocks away and went to school with her. Thankfully, that friend never showed up, and the friendship between my stepsister and her came to an end shortly thereafter. The second attempt was a little later in 6th grade when she had her cousin come over. Her cousin punched me, slapped me, pushed me down, and kicked me repeatedly. However, my stepsister's cousin never returned for another visit while I was present. Unfortunately, by 8th grade, my sister and stepsister recruited people to spread rumors about me in school. This resulted in the bullying becoming worse and worse, and in a subsequent video, I will discuss the bullying that I went through at school. My mental health and performance in school suffered during this time, and I began to engage in suicidal ideation. I felt I was better off dead than having to go through being bullied at school and being mistreated at my father's house. I ran across a busy street in the middle of the block near where I went to school several times, and a couple of my mom's friends noticed. As a result of my deteriorating mental health, my father lost a couple days of parenting time around Christmas of my freshman year in high school. My stepmother had him occupy my room for a couple days as a result, and he spent much of that time interrogating me about why I was unhappy at his house. He asked me if I had any friends at school. He kept on telling me that he was a great dad. He kept on saying, who sacrifices at work or sacrifices and works to support the family? He asked me questions like that and acted like I was being unreasonable for being unhappy with being mistreated. And this was while I was going through a mental health crisis, and it was only making the situation worse. Thankfully, they got out of my room after a couple days, but it was one of the more traumatic events at my father's house. Finally, when I was 16 and in my sophomore year of high school, my sister went to live with my father. They gave her my room and forced me to sleep with my stepmother's mother. I had no privacy, and when I hung out in the room, my stepmother's mother would lecture me about sleeping during the day, even though my sister and stepsister would not allow me to be downstairs. I had no private space due to the restrictions on the bathroom and due to losing my room. My family's therapist recommended to our family's court-ordered parenting coordinator that I stop visiting my father for overnight visits due to the lack of private space at my father's house and due to my father's and stepmother's unwillingness to make any changes at their house to make things more comfortable for me. The parenting coordinator agreed with those recommendations and ordered that my father only have short visits that were not overnight. However, my father refused to attend any visit that was not overnight, and ultimately a judge allowed me to stop visiting my father outside of therapy. He only attended therapy with me 2 more times before I turned 18, and I've only had sporadic contact with my father since then. This is only an overview of the many incidents that I went through during visitation with my father from 4th grade up until sophomore of my high school when visitation ended. I will say there were good times when I was alone with my father. However, during the last couple of years that I was doing visitation with my father, I would frequently go to work with him on the weekends when he was getting caught up with work and hang out in his office. I was able to get away from my stepmother and stepsister during this time, and he would actually do fun things with me. For example, we frequently went to food carts, and we also frequently took drives. There is still love between my father. I really wish I could see him, and I do still love him, even if he did cause me some pain. But unfortunately, with the way my stepmother is, he feels he has to please her, and so my contact with my father has been sporadic as an adult. And so this is pretty much my story of my childhood and the wildfire that raged. And as I've said earlier, it has left me with scars such as Irritable Bowel Syndrome. And I do not believe that any child should have to go through this kind of emotional mistreatment.